Holmes's phone vibrates. A text message from an unknown number. Come and play, Tower Hill, Jim Moriarty. The world's greatest consulting criminal was back, and he had picked his opponent, his playmate, quite intentionally. It was the world's greatest consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes. He accepted the invitation. The game is on. The game which, in the most recent iteration of the arrogant and rather idiosyncratic detective by the BBC network, is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who captures the brilliance and complexities of Sherlock's work while also exhibiting the vulnerability he develops as his relationships with others evolve professionally and personally through his many cases. Over the course of the series, and specifically in the episode The Reichenbach Fall, Sherlock allows himself to succumb to and accept his humanity as his character creates and maintains relationships with Mycroft, who monitors and scrutinizes his actions, Moriarty, who challenges and victimizes his mind, and Watson, who nurtures and normalizes Sherlock's human emotions. This complex interplay of personalities informs and contorts Sherlock's understanding of himself and his place in the world. As a recovering and sometimes struggling heroin addict, Sherlock Holmes's greatest case has always been the search for himself. But due to his eccentric temperament and lack of social refinement, Sherlock subconsciously relies on others to define him. The first person to influence the maturity of Sherlock was his older brother, Mycroft, who now works for the British Secret Service. However, Mycroft's encouragement is rather unorthodox. He frequently proclaims and often finds it necessary to remind Sherlock that he, as the eldest, is the smart one, the one who truly deserves praise and adoration. However, it was always Sherlock who received such recognition, despite his many attempts to remain just a bit less than an icon, but a little more than a sensation. Their relationship is always contentious. Their conversations are marked by their lack of emotion or fraternal camaraderie. That was, if they even had a conversation at all. Oftentimes, Mycroft would meet with people he believed were close to Sherlock in order to pass along a message. He goes so far as to offer compensation to those closest to Sherlock in order to maintain a watchful eye over him, because he worries about Sherlock constantly, but would prefer for various reasons his concern go unmentioned. They have what you might call a difficult relationship. Mycroft Holmes, much like Sherlock, is seemingly void of human emotion, habitually treating people as though they are expendable pawns. Audiences are privy to Sherlock and Mycroft's persistent tension in the episode The Reichenbach Fall. The two brothers are on restricted speaking terms and are forced to find alternative ways to communicate: chess, riddles, notes, abductions in dark alleys, and every now and again the extremely competitive game of Operation. The verbal exchanges are limited to utterances regarding Sherlock's work with the British Secret Service, because there is too much history for the brothers to converse beyond intellect. Sherlock Holmes's history with his brother was one of mental persecution. Mycroft dictated Sherlock's youth, and now that he is an adult, Mycroft often manipulates Sherlock's life using the resources available to him from the British Secret Service. Sherlock was surveilled as a national security threat, even though he often works for the government. For example, as Sherlock is walking away from a crime scene, Mycroft comments on the new company Sherlock keeps. Interesting. He could be the making of my brother, or make him worse than ever. Either way, we better upgrade surveillance status. Mycroft and his superiors knew that if Sherlock did decide to turn from cop to criminal, they would be at risk of being compromised and attacked. In a way, Mycroft is Sherlock's handler, keeping him on a leash long enough to make him feel like he is free to roam, but short enough that the government still knows his whereabouts and can pull him back if necessary. One of Mycroft's most invaluable resources are his many informants, people paid for relevant information they may have on certain people or about certain events. Mycroft often hires informants to share the location and happenings of Sherlock. One of these informants was named Kitty Riley, a struggling reporter with plans to write the story, Sherlock Holmes, the Man Beneath the Hat. Sherlock confronts her and explains, "I have two types of fans, ones that want me to catch them before they kill again, and those whose bedroom is just a taxi ride away." He deduced that Kitty Riley was neither. She was an anomaly. She was a fan, but she wanted to watch him fall. Mycroft Holmes was going to help her push him over the edge, although he was oblivious to this. He thought that Kitty Riley was a trustworthy informant and an exciting romantic fling. Mycroft, although notably trying to protect Sherlock, in regulating him, Mycroft actually tethered Sherlock between a rock and a psychopath. For in reality, Kitty Riley was James Moriarty's informant, using Mycroft to solicit personal information about Sherlock. James Moriarty isn't a man at all. He's a spider at the center of a web, a criminal web with 1,000 threads. He's a criminal for hire, a tradesman, the kind who would plan a bomb or stage an assassination, and is completely enthralled by Sherlock. After being released from prison and acquitted of all crimes, Moriarty follows Sherlock to 221B Baker Street. There he sits across from Sherlock and carves an apple. "Admit it, Sherlock, you're a teeny bit pleased with me to be back on the streets." Sherlock stares at Moriarty, watching him pick at the peel, following his eyes around the room, counting the beats he taps on his kneecap. Every movement nags at Sherlock's mind. Moriarty continues, "Every fairy tale needs a good old-fashioned villain. You need me, or you're nothing, because we're just alike, you and I, except you're boring, playing on the side of the angels." Sherlock knows why Moriarty found him. He is going to burn Sherlock, but how or when or why, it was a mystery. Luckily, mysteries were Sherlock's forte, but unluckily, mysteries were Sherlock's obsession. He wanted to know what it all meant, why a man he barely knew was so determined to destroy him. Moriarty's words burned. "I want to solve our problem. I really do, Sherlock. The final problem. The fall. Don't be scared. Falling is just like flying, with a little more permanent destination. I owe you a fall, Sherlock. Our problem." It insinuates that the two, Sherlock and Moriarty, come from the same mold. They are foils to one another, doppelgangers. Sherlock, although not entirely sure of what the problem was, could not leave it unresolved. Moriarty knew this about Sherlock, knew that all it took to control him was to control those who have put themselves in charge of managing the detective. Moriarty found victims to brainwash and convince that Sherlock was a threat, and then put them in Sherlock's path, knowing full well that he would do all he could to save them. Then, after their rescue, when asked who was to be convicted, the finger would always point back towards Sherlock, who could only deny so much before even those who once trusted him began to question him. This broke Sherlock. He was not Sir Boast-a-Lot, the medieval character Moriarty portrayed him to be, but he would have to prove that. So when Scotland Yard arrived at his door to take him and Dr. John Watson, Sherlock's flatmate and Vietnam vet, Sherlock had a loosely premeditated plan for their escape. They run and they hide, and they end up at the door of Kitty Riley, who has company, Rich Brooke. Rich Brooke, easily recognized by Sherlock and John as James Moriarty, was standing in front of them. This was yet another mind game Moriarty was playing, because the name Rich Brooke translated to Reichenbach in German, and that was what the public affectionately referred to Sherlock as. We learn Rich is an actor hired by Sherlock to stage a crime. At least that is what Rich claims. Sherlock is angry, and John is confused. Can Moriarty really just change his identity? Moriarty can, and he did it to get to Sherlock, to keep the game going, to abuse Sherlock's mind. Sherlock's mind is his palace, where he stores information for later retrieval. There are a copious amount of facts, memories, and well-supported theories strewing within his mind, and for Sherlock to recover this knowledge, he must travel to his mind palace, sometimes with the help of Dr. John Watson. John, after being discharged from the military as a result of disability, was looking for his niche in society, a place to practice and continue to give back. He found that with Sherlock Holmes. John joined Sherlock in the investigative process, working for both Scotland Yard and the British Secret Service, and is an asset to the investigation, offering input on the cause of death, motives of a suspect, and most importantly, is always accessible to and honest with Sherlock. John Watson is the anchor for the chaos that is Sherlock Holmes, keeping him grounded in morality and his humanity. John is accustomed to witnessing Sherlock's habits and investigatory acumen, but this particular case was different. John saw a side of Sherlock he had never witnessed before, and so did others, a sensitive side, like he cared about people. Molly Hooper, a mortician at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, noted that Sherlock never looks afraid in front of John, even though he is scared. Sherlock pretends to be okay for John's sake, his only friend. Sherlock had learned to care about John, to trust John, something Sherlock had never been able to do with another human being before. He looked to John for guidance, for insight, and for wisdom, thus humanizing Sherlock and allowing him to express emotions many previously thought he was devoid of. John Watson gave Sherlock the courage to be more than just a detective, but to be human, how to have and show sentiment and vulnerability. John brought Sherlock to a place of humility, where he was able to stand and do what was good and noble, leaving behind selfish desires. Sherlock, a man once divided, found himself while standing on the roof of St. Bartholomew's along with James Moriarty, who looks to Sherlock and says, "Here we are at last, our final problem. You were the best distraction, but I've beaten you. You're ordinary." It was in this moment that Sherlock knew that the game was soon going to be over, and it was his move. He realized that it was time for him to fall, to finish the game. He stepped on to the ledge of the hospital, thinking that everyone would expect that it was a suicide, as the genius detective proves to be a fraud. Sherlock accepted his fate as a tragic hero. He rose to esteem, but his inertia inevitably decimated his reputation. Moriarty recognized the look of realization in Sherlock's eyes. He was not ordinary, but rather extraordinary. "Thank you, Sherlock Holmes. Bless you." Sherlock Holmes had played the game just as Moriarty had hoped, just as he had planned. Moriarty was grateful for Sherlock in a psychopathic way, for he did everything he was supposed to, and now the game could end for both of them. Moriarty puts a gun into his mouth and pulls the trigger, and Sherlock, from the ledge, calls John Watson, who was below him in the streets. Sherlock was a player in the game, but he had also been played, and now it was time for him to die. There was a time when Sherlock would have walked down the stairs, away from that roof, but not anymore. John Watson had changed Sherlock for the better. He cared now. He wanted to be the hero, the notorious Boffin of Baker Street that so many people looked up to. Sherlock knew that his death would devastate John and the public, so in an attempt to make it easier for them both, he told John, "I can't come down, so we'll do it like this. It's all true. I hired Moriarty. I'm a fake. Tell anyone who will listen. This phone call, it's my note. It's what people do, don't they? Goodbye, John." He tosses the phone aside and he falls. He falls, and as he does, his identity unravels. The reputation he had meticulously constructed was no more. He would now be the detective who committed suicide, but it was all for the good of those he loved, so they would not have to deal with what-ifs or if-onlys. He was his demise. That was the end of it. The next time John sees Sherlock, it is a name engraved on a headstone, followed by 2 dates separated by a dash. He stood before it and told Sherlock what he regretted never saying before. "I'm angry. You told me once that you weren't a hero. There were times I didn't even think you were human. But let me tell you this. You were the best man, the best human being I have ever known, and nobody will convince me that what you told me was a lie. I was so alone, and I love you so much. One more thing. Don't be dead." John saw and brought out the human in Sherlock, when so many others just saw an insensitive narcissist. He made Sherlock likable and even lovable. Sherlock Holmes is the Boffin of Baker Street, the Reichenbach, and now a man who has a more concrete idea of who he is and what he wants. He is also alive. He won the game. Mycroft Holmes, who first betrayed Sherlock, sent him to his grave in order to retain him as a consultant until the rest of Great Britain figured out that he was innocent, that James Moriarty was the real menace. Mycroft knew the truth and would keep a watchful eye on Sherlock to be sure that he does not go rogue as a result of emotional and psychological stress. Moriarty's game took its toll on Sherlock, his mind and reputation becoming collateral damage, but he wasn't the only one affected. John Watson, the one who made Sherlock see the value in honesty and friendship, and in himself was left broken, absolutely devastated. He would have to wait 2 years to find out that Sherlock is alive. This truly did perturb Sherlock, for he had to betray, lie to, and hurt the only person who had ever really believed there was good in him, that he was more than just a high-functioning sociopath, all for a game. So while waiting for his reemergence into society, Sherlock stayed busy with other cases and thought of what was to come when he returned, all while knowing who he was and that the Reichenbach fall was yet another case he could hang his dear stalker cap on.